Hi, Carol. Welcome to the 2021 Reincarnation Symposium. I'm particularly excited to have you here today.
Thank you, and I'm excited to be here with you again.
Yeah. So I go back to think 61 years ago when psychiatrist Ian Stevenson's essay, The Evidence of Survival from Claimed Memories of Reincarnation, of former reincarnations, reviewed 44 cases, and that changed his career. And then he developed the what became the Department of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia, and they now have over, I think it's something like 2,500 cases, documented cases there,
Okay.
and their work had a ripple effect on the Western world. That ripple touched you. So fast forward to what year was it that Chase remembered his past life?
Yeah, it goes back to the 4th of July in 1988.
Wow, it's hard to
And I
believe.
knew nothing about children's past lives at that point. I knew something about past life therapy with adults because that had changed my life. It changed the course of a chronic illness I had. I had done a session with hypnotherapist Norman Ing in 1987. And the healing was so complete with me that a lot of my Asheville, North Carolina friends wanted to work with Norman. So he was scheduled to come visit in 1988. And in that interim between my regression and his visit, both of my kids expressed surprisingly deep-seated phobias, which I didn't even know about until they started talking about it. But in my son's case, his case was very dramatic. We went to a 4th of July fireworks celebration in Asheville in 1988. And once the fireworks began, he became absolutely hysterical. He started crying. I couldn't comfort him, took him home, and thought, that's odd. He was a very fearless little boy. He was 5 at the time. And I really didn't know what to do about it. And I thought, well, he was just overly excited about the party at our house that day. But a few weeks later, we were at an indoor pool, and when someone dove on the diving board, it made this big booming sound. And again, he became hysterical. So I thought, well, what in his short life could cause that kind of reaction? And I came up blank, nothing I could think of. But it was, he said that the loud noises terrified him. So by the time Norman came to my house, it was in August of 1988. He was working with a number of my friends in Asheville, including my medical doctor, who was amazed by my recovery from that one past life therapy session. And we were sitting around the kitchen table very casually, and I mentioned to Norm that Chase was, this phobia just started emerging, and he's terrified of loud booming sounds, and he was due to start kindergarten. So Norman said to him, would you like to get rid of this fear? And Chase said yes, and I trusted Norman completely. He was a very good hypnotherapist. So I figured he'd just give him some post-hypnotic suggestions so the next time he was exposed to these sounds, he wouldn't be terrified. Little did I know what was going to happen. That would change my life completely. So Norman said to Chase, sit on your mom's lap. He was very small, 5-year-old at the time. Close your eyes and tell me what you see when you hear the loud noises that frighten you. And I could see his eyelids fluttering. And he said, I'm a man. I'm a soldier. Crouching behind a rock. I have a long gun with a sword at the end. I have on dirty clothes. There's smoke everywhere. I'm scared. I'm confused. I don't even know who I'm shooting at. And I was like, that was the goosebumps moment. What is going on here? Because up until that time, I had no idea that children could remember previous lives.
Wow.
So this is like, but in the meantime, what Sesame Street episode, what Mr. Rogers episode was this, and we were like anti-television people. So, I knew what he had been exposed to and not much television and nothing. I was a stay-at-home mother at the time. So as Norman picked up on the fact that we were into some past life material immediately, but it took me a while to figure out what was going on. And Chase proceeded to talk about how he was fighting. He didn't want to be there. And he said he was shot in his wrist and clutched his wrist and he said, and then I black out. And Norman just continued, well, then what happens? Very open-ended questions to get him talking. And he said they bandaged his wrist. And he described what was later we found out a field hospital, just poles with a covering on it. And he said, I was on a bed, but it was a hard bench, and they bandaged his wrist. They make him go back to battle. And he said, I'm walking down a dust. He was getting these images in his mind. It's just like a movie reel. And he said, they bandaged my wrist. I have to go back to battle. I miss my wife and family.
Wow.
So that was it. That was like the
goosebumps.
Exactly. And I talk about the goosebumps effect when you know you're in completely different territory.
Yeah.
This is not imagination. Yeah. So that was the moment I thought, oh, okay, this is some past life memory. So he described walking down a dusty road. There were chickens on the road, weird details. And he said, I see a horse with a big wagon and a cannon on the wagon. The horse is pulling the wagon. I'm trying to figure what war is this? What time frame are we in? And he said, they make me go behind the cannon. And at that point, he just opened his eyes, jumped off my lap, grabbed a cookie, and went and played with his Legos. So I'm sitting there going, what the, what was that?
Oh my gosh.
And my daughter, who was 9 at the time, was sitting at the table with us while all this was happening. And she said, Mom, that place where Chase said he was shot on his wrist that they bandaged, that's where his eczema is. And from the time he was a baby, he had a chronic eczema on that spot on his wrist, which had not responded to any kind of medical treatment. We did all kinds of food elimination diets, homeopathy, antibiotic ointments, the stuff I didn't really want to put on him. And the upshot of that 15-minute or so recollection was his eczema completely cleared up. He had had it since he was a baby. And I used to have to bandage his wrist at night because he would scratch until he bled. It was relentless. So his eczema cleared up within a couple days, never to return. And his fear of loud noises went away.
Amazing.
It was related to later. He talked about it again over a 2-year period. And as he got older, he was able to articulate more about his memory, but it was always consistent what he remembered being behind the cannon. And he finally, at age 7, saw his death, experienced his death in that life when he got triggered again by Desert Storm, by us being at war, basically.
Uh-huh.
And by that time, he was able to express more. And I just said, just tell me what you see, exactly what Norman had done. And at that point, he said, I'm behind the cannon, and all of a sudden up above the battlefield looking down, and I can see the smoke below, and I'm glad I'm out of that. He said, but he needed to say goodbye to his family. That was one of the things that was still unfinished for him. And these were his words. He said, I'm in spirit now. We didn't talk to our kids that way. He said, you can, when you're out of the body, you can go see what happened to your family. You can float around. And he, in his mind, he said goodbye to his wife and children, and he felt freer. And he said, everyone has to experience war. We live all these different experiences, and because it teaches you how other people feel. It's a bad thing. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And, it was really his memories that so intrigued me, and the fact that he had healing of this chronic eczema and his phobia went away after talking about his traumatic death, that got me hooked. And, I was...
Yeah. And at that time, no one was really focusing on children's past lives from a therapeutic point of view.
No.
So you were groundbreaking in that regard, and I can't thank you enough for that.
Thank you. Well, it was interesting because I was in a very open community in Nashville. This was in the 80s. We had lived there since the 70s. And I was just so curious about it. And at that time, Brian's Weiss's book was out, but I hadn't read it. I didn't know, I was, they had Dick Sutphin books, the early books on reincarnation and
Yeah.
regression therapy, which didn't, some of it was very interesting. Morris Netherton's book, that was, the real deal.
Yeah.
But there wasn't much out there. And so I started talking to mothers in my community. Did your child ever talk about a past life? And I was starting to find, yeah, and they would tell me stories. And one of the preschool teachers at Chase's school told me a story about a little girl on the playground who was digging a hole, and she came over and said, "What are you doing?" And she said, she was crying, and she said, "I'm burying my children who died in the flood."
Oh my God.
So, I was getting, yeah, I know, these little
Goosebumps.
snippets, totally.
Just
And I'm
even
thinking,
hearing about it, I'm getting goosebumps.
yeah, I still get goosebumps with all these cases. And I thought, okay, this is probably everywhere, but people don't talk about it.
Right.
So I started doing my research. I started getting cases after I put in a reader ad in Mothering magazine. I don't know if you remember that. It was kind of an alternative parenting magazine. And I wrote something for Venture Inward, the ARE magazine.
Right.
And I started getting letters.
I think that's where I first knew about you.
Interesting. Yeah, that article. And I wrote an article for the Journal of Regression Therapy. So I started getting cases, and people would call me. It was pre-internet. And, I learned something from every new letter or phone call. And, I started keeping records and transcribing tapes from the telephone, cassette tapes. Spends hundreds of hours transcribing.
It's so much easier now, isn't it?
Oh my gosh. And it's the immediacy now of the internet has changed everything. When, I was doing it and all of a sudden the internet, and we got on early. My husband was an early user, so that changed a lot. But I started collecting cases, and I was seeing patterns. These kids are very young when they express these memories. And a lot of children have phobias relating to the way they died. A lot of kids talk about how they died, which is really shocking to a parent. And
you talk about the tone of voice when they're talking about these memories versus, normal childhood voice patterns. I think that's remarkable.
yeah, that they were very serious and matter of fact. And
Mhm.
if we didn't understand what they were saying, they would get a little frustrated that we don't remember that they died, or that they were a soldier before. Yeah, there is that tone of voice where and the goosebumps effect. The energy shifts, and you feel it. You feel, wait a minute, this is, you feel a little unsettled or a little, mild shock because you are in new territory. So by 1994, I was developing, because of my training in past life therapy. I'd started training in past life therapy around the same time. I met Roger Woolger through a friend.
Oh, yes, I know Roger.
Yeah, and I did training with him, and we became friends. And so I was developing the model of healing through past life therapy. And I saw, well, the kids, a lot of the work we do in past life therapy with adults revolves around traumatic experiences in the past. The trauma carries over. So I saw that as a dominant pattern. And what I was finding with the kids was that a lot of kids remember traumatic deaths. So I was combining what I was learning from the two. And since these memories are spontaneous with children and you don't need to use hypnosis, if you catch it when it's happening with a child, like we were lucky with that Norman was around, and he just asked Chase a simple question, what do you see? And he was there in the past life experience.
Yeah.
But a lot of kids are there spontaneously at a very young age, 2, 3, and 4. And if you can help them process what they're talking about, if they're troubled by a traumatic death, and they talk incessantly about how they died or the family they left behind or whatever unfinished business they had, you can help them resolve it very quickly in childhood, so the pattern doesn't persist into adulthood, because I have found that to be true with my adult clients, that a lot of times these patterns were evident when they were children and they actually had memories, but they were not processed in childhood. So the energy was still there and it kept showing up like PTSD, basically. So anyway, I was working blindly. I didn't know about Dr. Ian Stevenson until a couple years into it, when I read Many Lives, Many Masters, and Brian made one comment about a professor at UVA who was studying spontaneous past life memories of children. And as soon as I read that, I was on the phone calling the university press to get his books. And that completely blew my mind when I saw what he had done. And, I was saying, well, it's the same core phenomenon that I was finding, the patterns. The kids have phobias relating to the way they died, the age at which they express the memories. They could have behaviors relating to the past life they're talking about. Specific behaviors like phobias is a big one in about a third of the cases where children remember traumatic deaths. They have phobias of the way in which they died.
Right.
So that gave me more fuel. It gave me a foundation to stand on. And I helped a mother whose child was remembering a traumatic death, and I put what I had learned to use. I was developing this model, how you can help a child process the past life, the traumatic past life. And this mother from Chicago called me, and her son remembered being hit by a truck, and his personality changed after that. He became very depressed, and he said he had aches and pains on one side of his body where he said he was hit by the truck and died. He talked about dying. And I told the mother what to do, to help him know that that was something that happened before. Because the very young children do not know that they made the transition from another body into a new one.
And did she know anything about reincarnation at that point in time?
No, most of the parents I worked with haven't learned anything about it at that, up to that point. So they didn't know but they suspected, that this is something that really happened, because the way the child expressed it, that it wasn't just fantasy. But they, most of these parents had never read a book about reincarnation. And at that time, especially at the beginning, there were no TV shows about it. So 1992 was a real turning point when, I helped this mother, Colleen, with her son, and it worked like that. If the depression he started experiencing after he remembered the memory and the aches and pains on his body immediately went away. It was immediate. So that gave me courage to really put this information out there. And Colleen was so grateful. She wrote a letter to Oprah. And I thought, at that point I thought, oh, well, maybe someday I'll write a book. But, it was when, we all say, someday I'll write a book because this is so interesting. And what happened was, she wrote a letter to Oprah, and it was sitting in a file for a year under children's phobias. They were going to do a show on children's phobias, and the producer found the letter and immediately called me and said, "Is this true?" And I said, "Yeah, it's true. It actually happened." And I had a number of other cases at that point, and it was kind of a magical moment because the other cases, the other parents agreed to go on Oprah telling their stories. And that's really difficult to find, parents who are willing to go public with this or expose their children publicly. So 1994, Oprah did a whole show on children's past lives.
I remember that show.
That's interesting. Yeah, I was so terrified. It was the first time I had ever spoken publicly about this. There was no, it was trial by fire. I was thrust into that, and I thought, okay, I'm going to throw up or faint, But I didn't, but I was terrified. And my kids were on telling their stories. My daughter also had a memory the same day as her brother, but
it was a fabulous show.
Yeah, so that was a real breakthrough, and that helped me get a publishing contract. So I laid out the whole foundation for this work in that first book,
Yeah,
Children's Past Lives.
let me show
Yeah.
your first book, Children's Past Lives: How Past Life Memories Affect Your Child.
The publisher picked that subtitle, but it's fine.
Yeah.
So that was in 97. And then I got a lot more cases after that and wrote the second book about another phenomenon that revealed itself to be very common.
And I have that book with me
Yeah.
also, Return from Heaven. And this book really touched my life also, knowing that we choose our parents, we choose to connect with our families. Oh,
In the flesh.
in the flesh,
You're
yeah.
not only in spirit. Yeah, so I was getting so many of those cases, I thought, this is a setup for another book. And there was one case in particular, you had asked me about memorable cases, in an email. And what prompted me to write the second book was a story from this mother. I think it was 1990, let me think. Oh, okay. So she found my first book in the bookstore, and it was one of she said the book jumped off the shelf. You know how that works.
I know sometimes. That feeling. Yeah.
And so it must have been 97. Yeah, it was in 97 after the book came out. That year, she contacted me because she had a son, 13 years. No, wait a minute. I'm getting the time frame a little confused. She had a son who died of neuroblastoma.
Oh, right.
And at the time of his death, his name was James. At the time of James's death, he was only 2. He had a large tumor behind his left eye. He had a tumor behind his right ear. He had been in the hospital. They couldn't do anything more for him, but they had inserted an IV line in his neck, which left a scar. And he had 17 tumors in his left leg. It was, so tragic. She took him home. She was a single mom. One day he saw her crying, and he said, "Mama, don't cry for me." So she just cut it off, any kind of grieving process. And he died, I think he was 22 months old. And she was alone. She was not married at the time, and she just kept it all inside. And she finally met a good husband, and she had 2 other children before she gave birth to another child 13 years later by C-section. And while she was recovering from the anesthesia, the doctors came into the room, more than one doctor and the pediatrician, and said, "We have some bad news." And immediately she thought, "Oh my gosh, I hope he didn't die." And they said, "He's blind in his left eye." And she said, "Please bring him to me." And when she held him, she saw what looked like a tumor behind his right ear, where James had a tumor. And they said, "Oh no, that's just a cyst." And she saw this, what looked like a surgical scar in his neck, and they said, "Oh, that's just a birthmark." So that she said that the 3 things that were very obvious on James's body at the time of his death from his illness, from the neuroblastoma, were in this present baby. And she said the first time she held him, when you have a child who dies, you look for their essence, and if you have other subsequent children, it's kind of a normal feeling, remembering that feeling of that other child. She said it felt just like James. So she was a woman raised in, I think it was Kentucky, very fire and brimstone fundamentalist family who, reincarnation was of the devil, it was heresy. And she knew in that moment, my son's back. And she tried to tell her family, and they dismissed her, "You're crazy." So she learned not to talk about it. But then when this new child's name was Chad, when he turned 4, he started talking about the apartment they had lived in. She had lived in with James, and asked for toys that had belonged to James. And he kept saying, "I want to go back there." And she would asked, why do you want to go back there? And he said, because I left you there. So after that point at age 4, the comments, the statements he made just started pouring out of him about the other life. So at that point, she had contacted me asking, is this possible? What do you think? What am I supposed to do with this? And it was a long process. I talked to her on the phone for about 3 years.
Wow.
Finally, she got up enough courage to sit him down and say, look, I know you were my son before. He needed the acknowledgement. I know you were my son before, and I was so sorry that you had to leave, but you were a very sick boy, but now you're back in a healthy body, and I'm so glad you're here. And, he just kind of said, I know, and hopped off her lap. But it was healing
Amazing.
for both of them.
Yeah.
It was that acknowledgement of what was, and that this is another life, and, she loves him so much. And she said she felt this incredible weight lift from her, all of that grief she had not been able to express.
It was healing not only for him, but for her.
Exactly. So, in these cases, these memories, especially in the same family cases, which are so dramatic, like your beloved grandfather is back, and he's trying to tell you he's back through his statements or behaviors. They express this in all kinds of ways. And, Chad body, it was so obvious through the birthmarks. And Ian Stevenson had, at that point, written a 2,200-page, 2-volume set called Reincarnation in Biology. He sent me a copy that's on my desk, about birthmarks and birth defects related to fatal wounds and injuries or illness on the deceased person that show up in another incarnation. In other words, this is physical evidence for reincarnation. So Chad's was an amazing case of this. And at that point, I had met Ian and Jim Tucker, his research associate at the time. And I invited, with Kathy's permission, the mother's permission, I knew Ian would absolutely love seeing an American case. Most of his cases are from Asia.
Right.
He didn't have that many good American cases. So he and Jim and I went out. They went first to examine Chad and got the medical records. And then they did a second visit, and I went along with them and met Kathy face to face after talking to her on the phone for a few years and going through this whole very emotional process with her. And they found, correspondence between the medical records, the reports, that these birth defects and birthmarks were, in exactly the same spots as James's tumors and surgical intervention. So, with that case, there was the physical evidence. And in a lot of cases, there is physical evidence with birthmarks or birth defects. Defects are rare, but they happen. But the birthmarks are pretty common. And, it takes some skill to be able to discern, what relates to the injury from the past life and what's just a normal birthmark that could happen to anyone. But there's enough evidence, especially in Ian Stevenson's work with the birthmarks.
That one was screaming at everybody, wasn't it?
That what?
That those birth defects, birthmarks were screaming at everybody.
Right. But, in cultures where they believe in reincarnation, they actually look for evidence, the physical evidence. They look for birthmarks. But in the West, it's like, the concept of reincarnation is still so strange to most people until you experience it firsthand, especially with the children. But you know what they've been exposed to, pretty much, what a 2 or 3-year-old has been exposed to. So in these stories, it's really, and I know we're in agreement on this, the big news is about healing.
Yes.
And what I found in the same family cases, just as in Kathy's case, it was as much about her healing as it was about her son's healing. clarifying in his mind that he was really loved, or maybe he felt guilty about having left her alone, because he kept saying, because I left you with it. He wanted to go back to the other place because he left her there. So there was a mutual need to process that.
Right.
And in these same family cases, it's amazing what kind of, especially I found in the cases where you lose a child and the child can come back to the same mother.
Yeah.
It's so dramatic, and a time for healing. And in my second book, there are cases of, redemption, where, either for the one who died or for the ones who were left behind, there's an opportunity to heal.
I love that.
It's a miracle.
And to know that we don't die. There's a part of us that does not die is life-changing.
It is. And, I think, I told you we just wrote this essay. So all these ideas are fresh, but just the redemptive quality of that too, that we get more than one shot. If we make mistakes, or we feel, guilty because we could have done better, we could have saved them, we could have done something differently, you can actually put that burden down, knowing that this soul is back with you. And there's a reason, it's not random that they come back to us. And there's that big idea of unfinished business, which is central to these cases.
It certainly helps me be a much more compassionate, forgiving person to know that, to not just knowing it by reading it, but by also experiencing it personally. And gosh, you've had so many wonderful examples. I don't want to call them cases, but beautiful stories that have happened, around you and how they've affected you.
Yeah, it is with each new case or story. It is a story because the emotions are involved. It's not just a clinical case where you just go for the objective evidence, like how many statements did the child make. Yeah, that's good objective evidence.
Yeah.
But, in 2,500 cases, how many more cases do you need? But, people haven't really read Stevenson's case studies, and they're amazing, but they're dense, and his writing is very dense. It's not, and he misses the human emotion. He even admitted that he didn't focus on that enough. And, that's really mostly what I'm focusing on. Yeah, the objective facts are really amazing. Without statements, you don't know if you have a case. If the child doesn't say anything, they might have a phobia, but you could never trace it back to a past life. But if they, are terrified of loud booming sounds and they talk about dying behind a cannon, that there's a past life cause for this. And I think, this affects our ideas of how personality develops, how to treat different psychological or medical conditions too. It goes beyond the one life paradigm. So there is this continuum of personality from one life to another, where the kids carry in talents, skills, unlearned skills that show up very early in life. Kind of redefines what a prodigy might be, a child prodigy, that they've done it before. So there's so much to this that hasn't been explored enough. In the field of psychology, they may never catch on. It's because it's so confined to the one life paradigm. And, and I don't know whether it's going to change in my lifetime. But I'm going to continue writing about it just to get it out there.
You've planted some wonderful seeds, and I can just imagine and envision a world where people who know about reincarnation have a different attitude about raising their children and interacting with their children, their grandchildren, their families and friends. And I can see that for the future. Like you said, is it going to happen in our lifetime? Not sure.
Not sure, but it's okay.
Yeah.
I really felt without Ian Stevenson, I would not have a solid foundation, but he died in 2007. Was it? Yeah.
Thereabouts, yeah.
Number, yeah, close enough. Um, yeah, but there's so much more work to do, and I just, I want to find other past life therapists who understand the depth of this work and
And that's,
who want to work with children or
yeah.
or educate parents. Educating parents is really the key because they're in the best position to help the kid process the past life memories, their child.
That's why I'm so excited that you're one of our speakers for the symposium, because the more we can let people know about these things. And like I say, you've been groundbreaking when it has come to, children's past lives, and your work, as you said, can help people, adults who remember things that keep them stuck in their childhood. In fact, looking at the chair behind you, I remember the time when I sat in it and you helped me. So I'm proof that your work does work.
Thank you. That chair has seen many tears.
Yes, absolutely, and laughter too.
Yes, and relief,
Yeah,
healing too. Yeah.
cathartic, isn't it?
It is, and it's amazing how it can shift your worldview. And that's one of the things that in writing this essay, it came to the fore that a child's past life memory, when you're face to face with it, when it's in your family or, a child, it can completely change your worldview because it's real.
Yes.
They can't, 2 or 3, 4-year-old doesn't make this stuff up.
Yeah, you can't unring the
You
bell.
can't. But it's amazing that, there's so much more to explore. And, I'm going to do what I can with my remaining time. But, it's for other people to pick up where I'm leaving off too and find new ways.
I feel the same way. And, looking back over the over 30 years that you've been doing this, since Chase's experience, and I think there must have been some good karma happening that he chose you as his mother, because you were so supportive of his process. Think about how he'd been going through that without having such support.
But you and I know that all of this is orchestrated.
Yes, I love
in
it.
its own time, that.
No coincidence.
But I think it's a matter of, here it is right in front of you. What are you going to do with it? And you chose to run with it.
Yeah.
And actually, if you don't mind, a few years ago, since I've been asked frequently about Chase's memory and how it changed him, I posed some questions in writing. I emailed him. He's been abroad for a couple of years. I don't get to see him that much. And
well, I can't wait to hear what his answers are.
Yeah, and this is the first time I talked to him on the phone yesterday, and I said, would it be okay if I share this? And he said, of course, because he's very open.
Thank you.
And it really is interesting because, well, you'll see. So I pose these questions, and I'll read the questions and then his response. When I addressed them personally. What do you remember from your life as a Civil War soldier? We figured out it was the American Civil War, and he had been a black soldier in the American Civil War, which he said he was black, which, oh, okay. Then I did more research. Of course, there were black regiments and fighting around Richmond.
Oh, wow.
In your neighborhood.
More goosebumps.
I know. Okay, so his response. I remember pretty much everything that was discussed at the time when he was 5, 6, 7. I think the memory of a past life is very much like a dream. If you consistently keep it close, it doesn't go away. The first image I saw of myself standing on a rock with a gun posing for a photo is for some reason still the most vivid. Second question. Does this memory have relevance to your present life? Is it still affecting you in any way? Did you learn something from it? He said, the memory itself has lost its emotion. I don't feel emotionally attached to a life as a Civil War soldier, which is a good thing.
Yes.
The emotions resolved. But the effects that experience had on my life are profound. I am so grateful that I had that as a base for my spirituality growing up. Well, being around your research and influence certainly reinforced it. I don't feel I was forced into reincarnation as a belief at all. I felt the sincerity of my experience even as a small child, and I built on that foundation all through my adolescence and into my adult life. I've never had a fear of death, and I've never spent too much time in an existential crisis. I'm at peace with the bigger picture. It's the small things on this plane that are a challenge,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And okay, and then my question, do you think it has anything to do with your present personality? His response, I think an early belief in reincarnation has allowed me to see this life as only this life. In other words, it has given me a broad context and has made me very focused on, okay, what do I want to do in this life? I don't have to worry about doing everything. This broad perspective has set me up to take more risks. Growing up, I was always more open to other past life memories should they present themselves. I saw a life about 5 years ago that defines me now more than any other. I saw myself as an assistant shaman. In the morning, I would walk through the forest surrounding my small village to listen for the song of the day. I would take this song back to my tribe in the form of initiating the nightly ceremony through drums and chants. He's been a drummer in this life since age 5.
Oh my.
Or more before. A group of drummers and chanters followed my lead. Once the energy of the tribe reached a certain point, I turned it over to our medicine man so he could conduct the healing ceremony the tribe needed. As a drummer and cinematographer in this life, I'm in a vital supporting role to the lead voice. But also I know that I am capable of being that lead voice, which is something I'm working towards.
Oh wow.
So when Chase was a freshman in college, his eczema came back after, this public pronouncement that it went away completely. So when you were in college, the eczema returned. What did you think? How did that realization hit you? It was a little scary because I had to register for the draft for the school loans. After my memory when I was 5, I was told emphatically by you and Norm, the hypnotherapist, that I didn't need to fight in this life. I took that to heart and used it as a shield to keep me from getting scared of images of war. Registering for the draft was at the time, and luckily still, is the closest I got to fighting again. So it makes sense that my karmic scar returned. I still believe this, that I don't have to fight in this life. Politics aside, I don't feel the need to serve in the military in any form. On a karmic level, I don't feel the need for the war experience. I believe we've all lived many lives, hundreds, with the goal of as broad an experience as possible. I feel I've done a lot already, which is one reason being very focused in this life feels right. I chose to come here for very specific reasons. Otherwise, I might have moved on to a different plane.
Wow.
It's crazy, isn't it?
God, sounds like he has moved into his dharma, his purpose in life, and that is wonderful.
He is a visionary and is patenting a process. I can't even explain what it is, but it involves harnessing energy, light, sound, and I can't even explain it, as an interface with modern technology. It's on that level, which I don't understand.
Yeah.
But if this thing goes through, this project he's working on with a software developer, it will change radically things about performance and about movie cameras and all this other stuff that
Oh
I
my.
don't understand.
This is awesome. I can't wait to see what he does with this.
Yeah, he's so focused, and it's like he said, it's with a minimum of fear, which is a good thing because I'm not fearless. So it's like he's coming into his own, I think, which is the best gift we can give these kids.
Oh, this is the supreme gift to honor, what they've come into this lifetime to do, to how they express their divine
without the baggage that
without
they've
that.
carried in. We all carry in baggage.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Oh
So
my gosh. It sounds like there's another book coming out of all of this.
we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see. But we were talking about the traditional publishing methods have changed, so I don't really know what form this is going to take. But
Yeah.
also, Carol, I want to thank you for your time and energy putting together a symposium on reincarnation, because I can talk freely here. When I do my ordinary lectures, it's kind of a self-selected audience, but it's like I don't go into this depth. I understand a lot of the people you will be speaking to have some background in reincarnation or very curious.
I find people are just hungry to know more about this topic, and people have been coming to me left and right. And yes, some are newbies. They don't understand it, but they are hungry for this. It's like they know that there's something in here that they must devour. And so I was called to start this symposium. I was disappointed when you couldn't be part of it last year because you had a really busy schedule, but thrilled that you're part of it this year.
Oh,
So
thank you.
it,
Yeah.
you've made my day, as
And
they
you've
say.
made mine.
So as we wind up here, I want to ask one last question,
Yeah.
and that is, having experienced all that you've had, groundbreaking and everything, and being on the cutting edge of this work in this lifetime, and all the lessons that you've learned, both through your children and your own personal and your clients. What do you want to do in your next life?
Oh, well, assuming I have to come back, I don't really, it's
That's
funny,
a
I don't,
that's a good point.
I mean, I think about one thing I missed in this life, and I know I've done in other lives, was the music.
Ah,
And I think if I had brought in that talent again, I would have done that and not this. So I always felt like I know I've had past lives as a musician. I know things about music that I can't express, which is frustrating. My technique, and I just don't have it this time. So I'd like to bring that back again, just, as a vocation or an avocation, because I miss that ability, which is funny. But it would have held me back. It would not have gone as meaningfully
in
as
this
this life did.
lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't really know. I'm wide open, and I hope the earth is I hope we can correct our ways and the earth is habitable. If we need to come back.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
maybe with Chase's work about music in a different way, maybe that will have an effect on you in another lifetime if you choose to come back and focus on music. So
Yeah, that's an interesting point which I hadn't even thought of, but
yeah, maybe
yeah,
that
I'm
was
trying. Yeah.
a piece of the puzzle that needed to happen before you could really manifest this music that's wanting to come out of you.
Yeah, I don't know. But I see more people like Chase too, young people. Chase is going to be 39. Is that possible? I can't even do the math anymore. 38. He'll be 38 in October. So, and the 30 somethings, the 20 somethings are amazing people now. So they're the ones who are going to show us where the cutting edge is.
Yeah.
We don't know how much further we'll get, and they have to do the heavy lifting now.
And what you have done, what others have done to open the door to the West thinking about reincarnation, shifting the thought processes about it, that has helped lay the foundation for Chase and others to be able to move in a whole different way. I think I said to you, I feel like our generation is a breakthrough generation, and you're living proof of that. So
And so are you.
yeah, I feel like I am, even though I don't really talk about this as much as you do with my daughter. I know that on an energetic level, that she and my grandchildren are affected by what I'm doing. And your books have helped me with some things that happened with my grandson in particular when he was um, evident, showing some memories of a past life. And because I knew your work, and because I was beginning to study regression therapy also, I was able to be present to him in a way that um, I wouldn't have been had I not known these things and been exposed to them. So I'm watching it play out in his life. He's still young, so I don't know where it will take him, but it has really helped me. So I thank you for
Good.
that as well. And again, like I said, seeing that chair, you helped my inner child do some deep healing work. And you've just been a blessing to our world for everything that you've been doing.
Thank you so much, Carol. That makes me weepy.
I know I've been teary, and I haven't wanted to dab my eyes, but I've got tears in my eyes that have been flowing the whole time that you've been talking.
Oh,
For me, that's signals of truth, even more than the goosebumps. The weepy
yeah.
tears are tears of joy and tears of truth. And I only get that with certain people. So I just have so loved you sharing your work, what you do, and can't thank you enough. I can't wait to share it with the rest of the audience. And even though you won't be able to be with us in person on the 30th, I know you will be with us in spirit. And maybe next year we'll do another one and we can all be together in person and just have a wonderful celebration.
I like that idea.
I'm already seeing I'm such a visionary, so I'm already seeing what's the theme for next year. And I have to thank you. When I got to do the training with you in 2016, something that you said inspired the subtitle for this symposium, Reincarnation Stories. So the subtitle is Truth is Stranger Than Fiction. And that came from that workshop.
That's interesting because it is.
Yeah,
When you read these stories of the children, it's like you can't make this stuff up.
can't make this up. Yep, yeah. That
Yeah.
that is so true. So I want to wish you a wonderful trip when you get to be with Chase in October. Give him a big hug for me. Maybe next year he'll be able to be part of our symposium and be be a musician for it.
I would think he would also be open to being interviewed
Oh,
about his experience because he
I would
has
love
done he was in a few documentaries talking about even in his younger years, but one when he was an adult. So he still is open to talking about it.
Yeah, and just by the answers to your letter, his responses are so moving. And, for young people to hear his story from his lips, that would be so awesome. So, hey,
Yeah,
tell him he
yeah.
has an invitation for the 2022 Reincarnation Symposium.
I'll tell him to put it on his calendar.
Put it on his calendar. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll
Well,
take care, Carol.
yeah, thank you again, and so many blessings to you. And by the way, I want to give a plug. I was asking Carol about doing another training in the future. She says it is in the works. We just have to see how everything pans out with the pandemic. Sign me first up on the list. I want to do it, and
I will
I'll keep
remember.
everyone posted.
And I will remember that. I don't remember a lot now, but I'll remember that.
And I'll keep prodding you until you do it.
Okay, fair enough.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording and thank you and bless you.
You too.